Join the Mises Institute in Tampa, Florida on Saturday, February 22nd, 2025, for an event educating for liberty. Speakers include Tom DiLorenzo, Jonathan Newman, Timothy Terrell, and Jason Jewell. Use the link below, Mises.org/Tampa25, and use the promo code MINOR25 for 10% off the ticket price. That's MINOR 25. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute. Well, in September of 2023, we looked at the high price of beef and how big government has been bad for the American family budget. With stock indexes now even higher, the situation for beef consumers is even worse. In the U.S., the price of hamburger meat ended last year near a record high of $5.60 a pound. Just 5 years earlier, prior to COVID, it was $3.88 a pound. From the early 1980s to 2000, hamburger meat averaged $1.50 per pound. That means over the 40-year period, hamburger meat is actually 4 times as expensive. While it seems like this is a big increase, and it is, the rate of increase is only slightly higher than what the government claims has been the increase in consumer prices more generally over this entire period, as measured by their Consumer Price Index, or CPI. So beef has been a fairly accurate barometer of the impact of the federal government and the Federal Reserve policies undermining the household economy. The most rapid increase in beef prices and consumer prices in general has come in the aftermath of the Trump-Biden COVID spending sprees and, of course, the vast money printing by the Federal Reserve unleashed in 2020. Like most businesses, raising cattle and related businesses have faced significant increases in cost due mostly to inflationary forces. Grains used to feed cattle are impacted by monetary inflation. There was a huge upward spike in grain prices from the Fed's COVID monetary inflation, often blamed on Russia's invasion of grain-producing Ukraine. Grain prices actually peaked around the time of the invasion and then leveled off and have even subsequently declined, in part as the world economy has contracted. Even though grain prices have retreated, herd sizes in the U.S. must have come under enormous pressure with the COVID inflation as grain prices surged. Herd sizes of cattle retreated. Beef consumption also retreated in the post-Great Financial Crisis inflationary contraction. With prices relatively high and grain prices and herd sizes having retreated, beef producers are in a temporary sweet spot. But consumers and others along the supply chain, such as processors and wholesalers or even retailers, remain soured. It's a tough competitive business subject to the cycles of uncertainty. Another largely unnoticed inflationary impact on beef supply and prices is the Fed's monetary policy. The Fed has been suppressing interest rates for decades and causing price inflation. They did it again during COVID on a massive level and have only recently tried to normalize their interest rates. But this monetary policy, of course, is suppressing interest rates as they have been doing for decades. Every real estate agent, broker, dealer, or investor knows that interest rates are the major key to the real estate market. One aspect that I explored in my book, The Skyscraper Curse, which you can download a copy in the link provided, is the artificially low interest rates they create increase the demand to buy land, and this causes land prices to increase. Higher land prices mean that some land used for cattle might have been purchased and developed into different uses, or land that could be used to expand cattle ranching might simply be too expensive to purchase and convert into cattle production. It is possible to produce cattle and beef with very little land, as the Japanese famously do. However, economically speaking, it is much cheaper to produce cattle on grass and pasture land if that land is super abundant and close to the final market. You need far less land if feed corn and other grains are super abundant. However, the current circumstances are that land is scarce and high priced, and feed grains are also expensive and might get even more expensive. Both of those market conditions are driven in large part by the Fed's monetary inflation. I also suspect government intervention on behalf of the environmental terrorists might be playing a role, or might eventually be playing a role. These are angry people who think that cow farts are a catastrophic problem and that we should all be forced to follow their personal dietary philosophy, such as vegetarianism or veganism. This has certainly crippled the industry in Europe, which has experienced drastically reduced consumption and much higher prices, and I think this should be opposed. The beef industry, including all the processing and final product sectors, also faces a consumer base that is experiencing declining inflation-adjusted incomes. The net result is that fewer Americans even bother stopping at the meat counter in the grocery store, or they pick cheaper cuts of beef, or, which is a big part, they've opted for more pork, more chicken, and other cheaper protein substitutes. Per capita beef consumption in the U.S. has been on a relative decline ever since we were taken off the Bretton Woods gold standard in 1971. But in the last couple of years, there have been significant declines. With reduced herd sizes and prices sky high, the decline seems unlikely to be reversed in 2025. We may get some relief in the intermediate term, but I fear the long-run nutritional decline that current trends dictate. Based on my own anecdotal evidence, the high price of beefsteaks and roast makes people grumpy. It also undermines health because beef meals are highly nutritious and provide very high quality protein. I personally don't buy or accept the government's public relations campaign against beef and butter. One thing is for sure, Americans followed those government guidelines, but the expected results did not materialize. Quite the contrary. Diabetes and obesity are at all-time record highs. And while heart attack deaths have declined, but surely much, if not most, of that is due to better detection and care, hundreds of thousands of bypass and stent operations every year, and much better emergency medical services. It doesn't seem to be diet related. Is there a magic wand to solve the problem of high beef prices, as well as high pork prices and high chicken prices? Well, actually, there is. And we can begin by going back to the gold standard, or at least not allowing the Fed to target interest rates or to increase the money supply. Remove the wild swings in this market and make investment much more certain, and you'll get more investment. On the second day, I would release vast amounts of federally controlled land and eliminate the ethanol program that diverts corn, which can be used to feed people and cattle, into our gasoline. And of course, peace in the Ukraine and peace in the Middle East would unleash much more food and fuel for human consumption and for the human population. And this translates into, of course, improvements for the people directly impacted by those wars and conflicts. But it would also translate into improvements for the general world population. Efforts to roll back environmental restrictions and the opening up of oil and gas production, which will reduce farming and fertilizer prices, as well as increase production generally throughout the economy and increase jobs generally throughout the economy. All of this would combine to drive up people's real incomes, greatly reduce the cost of beef, and stimulate beef production. Within one production cycle, the American family would be back at their once-a-week steak nights.